Fashion reporter Abby White is crossing the ocean to pursue her dreams of making it big as a fashion writer. At only 23, she's in search of adventure and is even open to the idea of finding romance. But traveling alone on this cruise means attracting more attention than she ever anticipated. In the end, her cruise toward that career-changing cover story is more than she imagined. And an encounter on the high seas ends with her murder. Who would want to kill this aspiring young writer? And why? Abby White knew what she wanted, and she was on a transatlantic cruise to go and get it. The young fashion reporter had been sent to cover New York Fashion Week for a major fashion magazine. An assignment that would set her on her way as a journalist. Abby grew up in a middle-class home in a town north of London and not too far from Oxford. She had a strict upbringing with lots of rules and structure. But Abby was always her own person. School was a struggle, and her parents were not happy.
Abby's a young woman, comes from a wealthy family. She's always wanted to be a fashion writer. Parents have other ideas for her. They'd rather she went to university and became a doctor or a lawyer. But she's determined to strike out on her own and undertake this fashion writing career.
Abby's parents were certainly expecting a much different career path for their daughter. To their surprise, Abby moved to Hackney in London with her friend and began her writing career by taking jobs covering the fashion world.
I moved with my family to a new country, and Abby was the first friend I met. We had a lot in common, including fashion. We would cut out pictures from fashion magazines and put it all over her room. Her parents hated it.
Abby did a little modelling to pay her way through a journalism course. She eventually managed to get an internship at the London headquarters of an international fashion magazine.
She always talked about fashion. She wanted to be part of it in some way, even though she knew that it would never please her parents. But she always said that she believed in happy endings and that it will all work out in the end. Abby really wanted it all. She wanted a fairy tale romance, and she wanted an amazing career in fashion. But if she had to choose, it will always be fashion first.
After years of working her way to the top, Abby got her big break when the magazine needed someone to cover the New York Fashion Week. On the 27th of August 2015, she departed on a week-long transatlantic cruise, which would get her to New York in time for her assignment. Abby and her friend Liv were certain her career was about to take off. But it wouldn't be long before Abby found a story in the form of James Egerton. James, an international banker, was also travelling alone on the cruise. After a successful run at the craps table, Abby and James spent some time together.
Abby texted me when she was in the cruise that she met someone. Not just anyone, but the one. Of course, Abby would meet him on the cruise.
The following night, they were seen together in the lounge at around 8 p.m. Eyewitnesses said they were behaving very much like a couple. Cruise ship performer Carlos Randolfo began serenading Abby right in front of James, offering her a flower during his act.
Abby texted me that she got serenaded by a new guy in front of her guy. Of course, that will only happen to Abby.
Cruise ships are supposed to be fun experiences. It's not unusual for crew members to get a little bit flirtatious with some of the passengers. It's supposed to be all in good fun. Now, is this what was happening with Carlos? Was he just being a bit flirty to make Abby feel good and make her night a bit better? Or did he sense a real attraction?
According to witnesses, James left Abby alone at the table at around 11 p.m.
Abby didn't care about jealousy in a relationship. She just wanted to have fun.
Several audience members that evening brought information to the investigators about this interaction between the performer and Abby. Typically, performers or cruise ship employees aren't supposed to have these types of interactions with the passengers. This seemed to be an overture on part of the performer towards Abby specifically.
Carlos caught up with Abby after the show and begged her to see him the next day, showering her with compliments, waxing poetically in an attempt to seduce her.
And then she texted me the next morning about this singer pursuing her.
Abby told her friend she was going out that night but didn't say with whom. She said she planned to dance the night away. But the last time Abby White would be seen was on CCTV footage from her balcony.
I told her to be careful out there. That's the last time I heard from her.
Someone had thrown her into the icy waters of the Atlantic. Who had murdered Abby? And why?
I wish Abby would have listened to me. You have to be so aware of everything and everyone out there.
To find the culprit, the ship's crew would have to piece together Abby's final hours.
At first, investigators think that this is all a twisted love triangle. But as they start to review the evidence, they get quite a shock. Things aren't what they seem.
Abby White, an ambitious fashion journalist, on her way to the biggest assignment of her life, was travelling on a transatlantic cruise from England to New York City. She was also in search of a little fun and romance on the high seas. And the 23-year-old had received plenty of attention from a number of men on board the ship. But Abby had been murdered. Could one of these men have been responsible for her death? Or was someone else responsible for her murder? On the fourth night of the cruise, Abby posted on her social media account that he was too attractive for his own good, in reference to the ship's entertainer. It would be the last post she'd ever make.
As long as we can determine that the post came from the person in question, which is often a difficult thing to do, social media posts can act like a personal diary, especially when a person posts on a regular basis and then suddenly it stops. We would question, why did it suddenly stop? We would also have a timeline to be able to work from. If we knew that she was the one that posted that message at that particular time, we know she's still alive. In this particular case, her last post referenced a troubadour who she seemed to have a liking towards. We suspect it might be this performer on the ship.
Eyewitnesses said Abby and Carlos were spotted in the casino together that evening. At 3 a.m., a ship steward received a phone call from Abby's room. It was a strange time of night to receive a call. When there was no answer, the cabin steward assumed she must have accidentally dialed his number. The following morning, housekeeping discovered Abby's room had been ripped apart.
I can only imagine what a cruise ship cleaning staff has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Some of the things they see must be out of a horror movie. But this is way beyond that.
The maintenance staff prepared to clean up the mess they found in her cabin, which would destroy any evidence of foul play.
In this particular case, investigators, there's no way to describe it other than they catch a break. The steward remembers the strange phone call he had from this particular room number as he's passing by the room.
The ship's steward told the housekeeper that she should wait before cleaning the room.
Typically, a crime scene needs to be preserved as soon as possible so that the evidence can't be contaminated.
He showed her the signs of a struggle and told her about the phone call he got in the middle of the night.
Had this person, the steward, not put two and two together, as he happened to be at the right place at the right time, evidence might have been lost forever. He stops them from cleaning up the room, thus preserving the crime scene. Had this not occurred, that evidence, or any evidence in that room, might be gone.
Instead of cleaning the room and potentially destroying any evidence of trouble, the steward notified the ship's head of security.
When the fact that somebody might be missing is brought to the attention of the crew, then typically the captain or whoever is in charge at the time will make efforts to call for that person over the ship's loud hailer, asking for that specific person to present themselves to help locate them.
The crew rushed to find Abby and issued a ship-wide notice and posted her profile on the ship's television network.
By the time Abby's disappearance is reported to the crew and that they can get a search going and try to establish whether or not she's on the ship or has gone overboard, more than a day goes by before they even realize she's missing at this point.
Many eyewitnesses came forward. And it didn't take long before the ship's investigators worked out a period of time to check the security cameras outside of Abby's room.
Statistically, the victim of a crime is more likely to suffer at the hands of somebody they're acquainted with or know in some capacity, as opposed to being the victim of some random act where there's no connection whatsoever with the perpetrator.
Before they even got a chance to review the security footage, James entered to provide them with the identity of a prime suspect. The ship's entertainer, Carlos Randolfo.
James is pointing out to investigators that Carlos is the prime suspect is really pure speculation. And it's based on the fact that James didn't like Carlos's overture towards Abby during the performance the other night. James has just as much of a connection to Abby, if not more, than Carlos does.
Cruise ship employees have a lot of rules, especially when it comes to interacting with the staff. What's appropriate, what's not. However, Carlos isn't staff. He's a performer. He's got a lot more free time and a lot more flexibility in his schedule. Of course, he did break the rules by going after Abby White, but did he break the law?
Often as investigators, we find the person responsible will pick somebody to try to deflect blame and send investigators down a different path in the hopes that they'll get away with it.
When investigators checked the camera trained on Abby's door, they came up empty as the camera wasn't working. But there was a second camera that had recorded movements outside of her cabin. It was a balcony camera installed for safety in case a passenger fell overboard. Fearing the worst, they combed through hours of footage, trying to find any clues about what might have happened to her.
Video from the ship's surveillance system shows that Abby was in fact thrown overboard. And there was a character there who roughly matched Carl's description. Ultimately, he needs to be brought in for questioning.
Young fashion journalist Abby White was thrown overboard by an unknown assailant, which was captured on the ship's security cameras. Witness after witness had come forward, helping to piece together a story that implicated the ship's entertainer, Carlos Randolfo. He was into the second week of a 4-week contract on the transatlantic cruise. The ship's investigators heard from several eyewitnesses that Carlos had approached Abby repeatedly over a 2-day period. He had flirted with her in the lounge where James Egerton had taken her on a date, and had tracked her down later that night and asked her to see him again.
One of the most important things we can create as part of the investigation is a timeline of events to try to track exactly where everybody was and what occurred. Abby was in the casino with Carlos just after midnight. We know that her room card was used to enter her room at around 1 or 1:30 a.m. Then there was the strange phone call reported by the steward at about 3:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then finally, we have the timestamp on the video where Abby is seen being thrown overboard. So we're able to establish what's occurred between midnight and 4:30 odd in the morning.
Investigators conducted a search on the room key that belonged to Carlos.
So an electronic key card or an access card is something that would be given to a passenger. It's registered to them. There's an electronic tracking of everywhere on the ship that card would be used, and it's stored in the computer system on the ship. So it would know if a door is left open for any period of time. It would know when a door is open, when it was closed. It wouldn't tell you necessarily who went through the door, just that that particular card was used to open it.
They discovered it was used to enter his room just before 5 a.m., just minutes after Abby had been thrown overboard.
Abby was up for an adventure, and I think that's why she agreed to see the singer Carlos.
Well, as an investigator, the primary thing is motive. You want to know why a particular event takes place, and the best way, or one of the best ways to find out why something takes place is to look at everything leading up to that moment. Who was in play? What was in play? Where were they when certain things were done or said? So that timeline is critical to an investigator.
The security staff went to Carlos's cabin to bring him in for questioning. And what they discovered when they got there was completely unexpected. His wife, Lita Randolfo, was also on the trip. As she heard of her husband's adulterous ways, she grew upset. But Carlos offered a startling story to investigators and to his wife. He claimed to have an alibi.
As a result of the interview with Carlos, he provided an alibi to investigators.
He wasn't in his room at the time Abby was thrown overboard, because he was with someone else. A woman he knew only as Tiffany.
Just because Carlos may be capable of having an adulterous affair doesn't mean that he's capable of murder. The police are going to need a lot more evidence to pin this on him, whether or not he looks suspicious. Or they could just wait and see what justice his wife has in store.
So this now presents investigators with a list of almost 2,000 people, those being the people on the boat at the time, as potential suspects.
With only one more day of sailing before they reached New York, time was of the essence for the onboard security team. Ship security detained Carlos until his alibi checked out. And just to cover their bases, they detained James Egerton, who had also been seen with Abby.
Investigators would conduct a background check on people who are their immediate suspects, and in this particular case, James, who's in this relationship with Abby, is somebody that they would look into. So they'd be looking to see if he had any history of violent offenses, if he's had any sort of involvement with law enforcement in the past, and what type, if any, of crimes he was involved in.
Born in London, but living between Switzerland and Manhattan, James was a young, successful international banker. With a high profile in financial circles, he travelled to New York regularly for meetings and to spend time at his second home. He was a bachelor with a busy life and little time for fun or relationships. James became a frequent passenger on board this transatlantic cruise due to a fear of flying. He professed his innocence and even offered to employ a private investigator to assist in finding out who had killed Abby. If Carlos's alibi checked out, investigators would have come up empty in their search for suspects. Perhaps it was a random stranger who attacked Abby on the night she died.
Sometimes we look at these occurrences and we consider relationships and intimate partners as being involved. But the other side of it is that it could have been just a random occurrence. It could have been a crime of opportunity. Somebody saw something in Abby that they wanted or didn't like and reacted in that moment, resulting in Abby's going overboard. in that particular case, it's a much more difficult situation to solve.
Keeping 2,000 people on the ship any longer could cause an international incident, something they definitely do not want. The clock is ticking, and they've only got a certain amount of time left to find the murderer. In short, they've got a day to solve this murder.
I can't believe that someone will do that to Abby.
For investigators, the trail of evidence in the murder of Abby White had come to a dead end. They desperately wanted to track down her killer before the ship reached its final destination. For the ship's investigators, time was of the essence.
Cameras aren't typically located in hallways where they give you a good view of who's coming and going from each cabin, mostly to protect the privacy of the passengers on board. So in this particular case where we have a really disturbed or messy cabin, it's potentially a crime scene, but we don't know what evidence is there at this point. It's potentially an indication that there was signs of a struggle. In the absence of a body at this point, it's hard to determine what occurred, what happened to Abby.
The clock was ticking, for when the ship docked in New York, the entire dynamic of the investigation would change.
The crew is in a very difficult position right now, along with the captain and the investigators. If they keep everyone on board, people are already starting to get really upset. They're going to have an incident in their hands. On the other hand, if they let everyone go, there's a chance the murderer could escape, and they may never get that person back.
Investigators went over the case against Carlos Randolfo one last time.
This could be a crime of passion. Rejection, jealousy, these are very common reasons why murders occur. People's emotions get out of hand. It's often used as a defense. A crime of passion lessens the time that people spend in jail. If it's proven that they acted in the heat of emotion, it's almost like a temporary insanity defense. That they weren't thinking clearly, that it wasn't premeditated. This could have been the case with Carlos. Perhaps he made an advance on Abby and he was rejected and acted out of hurt and or rage. It doesn't make sense that someone who didn't try to hide his feelings for Abby would plan a premeditated murder. Maybe things get out of hand quickly and his desire turns violent when he doesn't get what he wants.
With hours to go before the ship was scheduled to dock, a woman named Tiffany came forward to validate Carlos's alibi. She was the one he had spent the night with, but was afraid to come forward earlier because she was meeting up with her husband in New York.
So as another level to this investigation, we have a woman, Tiffany, who comes forward to investigators and advises that she was in fact with Carlos between 2:30 and 5 a.m. Her room card shows that she entered her room at that time, and she says she was in fact with Carlos.
He may have had a roving eye, but he isn't Abby White's killer.
Tiffany was hesitant to come forward to investigators because she's in fact married. So in her particular case, there's a cost to her bringing this information forward, but ultimately she did the right thing by letting investigators know that she was in fact with Carlos at the time.
Could James Egerton have killed Abby White? Investigators had one final chance to prove he was the murderer before it was too late. Abby White was a young, fun-loving fashion journalist with a taste for adventure. She engaged in at least 2 flirtations while aboard a transatlantic cruise from the United Kingdom to New York City. One with an international banker, James Egerton, and the other was with Carlos Randolfo, who was contracted as an entertainer and who had brought his wife along on the cruise. With the lights of New York City on the horizon, and on the final night of the cruise, an email arrived from the UK police with the results of their background check on James Egerton.
MI5, which is the British National Investigative Service, relayed information to investigators about James. He doesn't in fact have a criminal record, but is currently under investigation for a number of sexual assaults. The charges, however, were dropped when the victims refused to come forward and testify.
Investigators confronted James with this new piece of evidence, hoping to force a confession out of him.
As they interrogate him one last time, they happen to notice that he has 2 long scratches on his forearm. They managed to get him to hold still long enough to see that he was obviously involved in some kind of a struggle.
Finally, Egerton broke. He said he saw Abby in the casino that night and waited for Carlos to leave, which happened around 2 a.m. Once James knew Abby's room number, he approached.
Well, jealousy is a very strong human emotion, and it's often the cause of a lot of violence. It's a very, very strong motive in a lot of crimes. It seems that James has an established pattern where he will enter into a relationship with someone. Seems quite normal, but then very quickly that relationship turns violent.
When the ship arrived in New York, James Egerton was charged with the murder of Abby White.
We don't really know whether what occurred in her cabin was a crime. Was she assaulted there? We just know that the cabin is in disarray. We do know that she was thrown overboard later on as a result of video footage.
The FBI arrived on the ship to investigate and collect all the forensic evidence they could from Abby's room. James admitted to having sex with Abby, but said her mouth had filled with foam while they were together, and she suddenly fell unconscious.
James makes a claim to investigators that Abby had a massive seizure while they were being intimate.
Abby did suffer from seizures, but they were rare.
One of the most difficult types of homicides to solve is where there's no body recovered. In this particular case, Abby's body hasn't been recovered. James has admitted to having an intimate relationship with her, but we don't know whether or not he's involved in her murder.
Unsure of what to do, and because of his recent history, James decided to dispose of Abby's body.
In the absence of a body, you don't know, did she die of a seizure? Did she die of a heart attack? Was she in fact murdered? Without any other forensic evidence available, there's no way to prove that she was in fact murdered.
Would the court find that Abby had died of natural causes, or would they convict Egerton of murder? An international banker, frequent cruise ship traveller, and with 3 prior charges of sexual assault, all of which were dropped before getting to court.
A cruise ship flies a flag of origin, and that flag determines the law on the ship. Unless, of course, it's in a port where the law of that particular country would take precedence.
Since this is an American-owned vessel, any crime committed on board is subject to American laws. So even though the accused is a British citizen, the case is still tried in an American court.
James admitted to having sexual relations with Abby on the night she was thrown overboard, but claimed she had a seizure and died of natural causes.
You can suffer injuries as a result of having that type of seizure. It can be a result of a medical issue, it can be a result of a head injury or other traumatic injury to your body. I guess there are a number of ways that you can suffer such a seizure. Even with evidence that he, in fact, threw the body overboard, if she died of a seizure prior to it, he didn't kill her. He may be improperly disposed of a body, so you couldn't charge him with homicide, you could charge him with something different. That's the difficulty that you run into in the absence of human remains.
A jury found James Egerton guilty of second-degree murder, despite Abby's body being lost at sea.
Second-degree murder refers to the fact that there was intent to kill, but it wasn't pre-planned. It was intentional homicide that occurred in the spur of the moment.
Egerton will spend life behind bars, but the family and friends of Abby White will never get to find out just how her own life story could have played out.
I was relieved when James was thrown into jail, but it still doesn't bring my friend back. Abby was motivated and determined to show her parents that she could make it in fashion. She was willing to do anything. And unfortunately, it cost her her life.
This is a case that really brings to life that old adage, the truth is stranger than fiction. But until we get some other proof, that's how the story ends. It remains a mystery to this day.